And we are live. Welcome, everybody, to Lubbock Compact Live for Wednesday, March 9th. I'm your host, Adam Hernandez, here with my co-host, Dr. Nick Bergfeld. And we do have another special guest with us today that we will be interviewing after our city updates. This is Jason Rinaldo. He is a LISD candidate for LISD District 3. And so we will be having a conversation with him. As always, you can put your questions in the comments and we will see those. We'll be monitoring those as the show goes on. And questions or comments, either or. So please share the broadcast and let's get right into it. So really good meeting this past week at City Council. And basically, one of the big things that happened is every year the city's finances are audited. And so they have a consultant or a public accountant firm come in and audit our finances to make sure everything's good. And then also they produce an annual financial report that gives us all the details about what's going on with the city's finances. And we're not going to get into all of it because it's a whole lot and we don't want to put you all to sleep out there. But there are a couple of things that we wanted to pick out of here that I thought were noteworthy for sure. So there's been a lot of talk, especially with the recent bond election that failed. There was a lot of talk during that discourse that the city's finances were in bad shape, or we had an outrageous amount of debt as a city. And we definitely have some debt. So, I mean, we're not going to say we don't have debt. We definitely have some debt, but there's a really good graph in here. And all of this stuff, by the way, is available on the city's website. But there's a really good graph in here that shows that the debt is trending downward. We have reported on this program before that the city has paid down so much of their debt so quickly that our bond rating, which is in essence the city's credit rating, is really good. And so that's the next part. So the debt, all of our debt is scheduled to be paid off by 2051, which is really not too far down the road. And so there's that part. And then that brings us to our bond rating. And so there's three institutions here. So how you have with your credit score, you have an Equifax, a TransUnion, Experian, all those different firms, or institutions. For cities, it's Standard & Poor's, Fitch Ratings, and Moody's. And in all of those, we basically have an A+ or an A- in one of them, but pretty much good scores all the way across. So as we have reported before, once again confirmed by the audit, is our city's finances are in really good shape. The debt is continuing to be paid down. I'm very much in favor of continuing that trend. And so I don't see that reversing anytime soon. And we have a really good credit score for our city. So
yeah, and it's exciting to me. And I think one element for many Lubbock citizens who hear about Lubbock's debt burden, right? So on a per capita basis, it does look like Lubbock's debt is quite high. Lubbock has a per capita. So that means if you take all the debt that Lubbock has and you divide that by everybody that lives here, so it's essentially how much debt burden each one of us is, if you're distributing out all the cost. If you look at that number, it's comparable to, say, Dallas or Houston. But when you look at it historically and you look at the reasons why that debt burden is the way that it is, our debt burden right now, the reason why we have such a significant one, has a lot to do with investing in Lubbock's future. So a very substantial component of that debt is in water, and essentially for the paying of the creation of new well fields to draw water from and the maintenance around Lake Allen Henry and Lake Meredith. And so that part of our debt, actually, we will pay off in about 10 years from now, about 10 years time is where we'll see that roll off. And that is such a significant portion of our debt burden that, to me, yes, when you see that our numbers are comparable on a per capita level to Houston or Dallas, at first glance, you could say, well, that's really concerning because those cities, they have a lot more economic drive. They have a lot more resources to utilize. And so for Lubbock, that'd be a concern. But we're paying down this debt to the tune of maybe 150 or 160 million a year. We're able to put that in and not have a substantial impact on the overall operating budget of the city. And simultaneously, we're paying that down quite rapidly. So overall, the talk of Lubbock's debt burden, I think there's just a lot more there than what people oftentimes sort of hear at the top level of just how big it is or what it represents. But the reason why it is what it is was because of strategic investments. If you look at the biggest cost that we have right now, it's effectively for water and electricity. The other big element that we took on was payments to allow us to connect to ERCOT. And so we had a big choice. This is 12, 15 some odd years ago now, of investing a certain amount of money in getting connection to ERCOT, or investing a certain amount of money to get power generation capacity where we essentially could stay in the Southwest Power Pool. We chose the strategic route of where we thought we would save costs actually as a city if we went into ERCOT. And so even that debt burden, there was a conversation about what is the right strategy? How much should we take on for securing the energy future of the city as well? So those are two major critical once in 100-year investments that were both done. And we are responsibly paying those down and maintaining, AA plus bond rating simultaneously. So it's all just very encouraging.
Yeah. Yeah. And so once again, you can find this stuff on the city website. If you really want to dig into the financial report, you can get that. And so, yeah, that's that. And so the other thing, the other big part of yesterday's work session, these were both in the work session, was the further discussion of the American Rescue Plan Act money and where we're putting that. And we've been updating you all about kind of what the discussion has been up to this point. I just want to kind of point out some things that are already moving, that are pretty much ready to go out the door. And so one of those things that we talked about was the affordable housing that the city is investing in. And once again, the city is not buying any lots. The city is not buying any houses. They're not going to own any of that. What the city is doing is putting in roads and putting in infrastructure for electricity and things of that nature to connect to the city services. And so then the developers, normally there is a process where different developers may all join in on this. In these particular projects, there will be one developer each. And so one of these is pretty much ready to roll out. It's going to be 60 single family residences. They're going to be owner occupied. And once again, the amount that's been allocated to this is $1.25 million for each of those projects. So $2.5 million altogether for affordable housing. And so basically, if anybody out there is familiar with the Kings Dominion neighborhood in East Lubbock, this will follow the same sort of plan that they did there. All brick houses, limited upkeep on the exterior of the home, and the fenced backyard. And so that's kind of the base level of what they're going for here. And then the second project, right now they have up to 33 single family residences, but they're trying to up that number. And so there's some different ways they're looking at being able to build more on that. So this is not as far along, but both of these additions are going to be added around the Estacado area, which I think is really good. We definitely need to add more rooftops and hopefully eventually get those neighborhood schools back that we lost. And so another part of the ARPA updates is for the arts, and Miss Stacy Keith and the Lubbock Cultural Arts Foundation have been at every single meeting. I see Miss Stacy Keith there every time I'm there. And so she has been following along with ARPA, and she's really been making sure she's staying on this on behalf of the artist community here. And she does really great work. And I just have to commend her for just showing up and doing all of this. And so with the ARPA money, they allocated $1 million to the arts. Now, the Lubbock Cultural Art Foundation will basically be the administrator of this. And the city, with all of the money, the city will be the one actually cutting the check. So you'll have, for these different programs, you'll have an administrator that will deal with the businesses or the nonprofits or whoever they may be, and get you through all the paperwork and all of that. And once everything goes through, you'll actually go pick your check up from the city. So that's how that works. And so out of the $1 million, the Lubbock Cultural Arts Foundation will keep 5% of that to do the administration for this. So that will leave $950,000 that they will be able to give out in grants. These are grants, so these are things that don't have to be paid back. They're going to have an independent artist grant. They're going to have a couple of those. So for part-time artists, you'll be eligible for up to $5,000 and up to $10,000 for a full-time artist. And then if you're an art business, there will be grants with maximum awards of up to $25,000. And so all of these applications will be different in their various ways, but the gist of it will be that you'll just need to show that you were impacted, or your sales or your income was impacted by the pandemic, which is usually they're going to want to probably see your tax returns or anything like that, your business documentation.
Yeah, and it's a good thing to make a note of. So these dollars, showing proof that you've been impacted by the pandemic, right? That's where these dollars ultimately came from, was from the American Rescue Plan Act dollars. And that allocation from the federal government doesn't have a whole lot of federal strings attached in terms of showing need, other than saying that communities need to find investments for these dollars for the most economically impacted or the most adversely impacted groups within your community. And so the artist community has experienced a lot of difficulties as a result of the pandemic. And so if you are an independent artist who's listening or know of one, whether that be, I think it's nice that they have a part-time component to that, because there's a lot of artists in Lubbock who are still trying to find a way for that to become their full-time job. And so there's grant opportunities for those folks as well to apply.
Yeah. And then another one, of course, was for small businesses, similar program. These are grants. The allocated monies there are $2.5 million. And so on those, the application process will probably be a little more strict. But the partner that's going to be working with the city and the administrator for this one will be the South Plains Association of Governments. From what I understand, these are the ones who administered the one last time. And so they're just going to stick with the same program here. And so the thing with this one here is that you cannot have received a PPP loan or EIDL loan or the previous LIDA micro grants that they did the first time around.
And this is, I'm very excited to see this develop. And part of that reason was the critique that advocates in the community made to the original economic relief dollar response of the city. And that was an understanding that a lot of the government programs that were coming down the pipe were tailored for certain kinds of businesses that were above a certain amount of revenue, businesses that had a long enough track record where they had books, businesses that knew how to keep their books, businesses that had relationships with bankers so that they knew who to call and who to get in touch with and to get the funds deployed. There were a lot of red tape around how these dollars could be used. And what we've seen, and this isn't unique to Lubbock, but what we've seen both in Lubbock and at the national level, and we published a report on this, is that you see a disparity in where those dollars go. That traditionally and historically, businesses that are run by people from Hispanic or African-American Black backgrounds oftentimes are the ones that have these issues or struggle with the red tape that these programs had around them. And so to see the city come back and utilize the ARPA dollars and be very deliberate in acknowledging and creating new criteria for how these companies are going to be assessed, and to put restrictions on, if you've previously been able to find financing, this isn't necessarily the program that is for you. This is for folks that, for one reason or another, didn't think that they were either eligible as their business, or were intimidated by the process, or felt as though that they just simply couldn't fulfill all the standards from those previous application cycles, this is the opportunity now. And so, don't think that there are other folks that you're competing with on this. A lot of the people who are eligible for PPP loans knew how to get them and got them. EIDL loans knew how to get them and got them. So, don't think that you, by sitting on the sidelines and not applying for this economic relief, that you're helping somebody who's more in need. This really is, at this point, we're trying to reach out to, as a city, the folks that are in the greatest need in the business community who have not had any access to financing in the past. So please, if that's you, go through this process. The South Plains Association of Governments, their website will have information about it, I'm sure. And they successfully administered a smaller version of this whenever the COVID crisis began. And so I'm optimistic that these dollars will get used and will be done in an effective way. But please consider applying if you have a business and you haven't received any of these other government assistance grants by now.
Yeah, and there's different tiers, but the lowest one is if your business makes 100,000 or less, you're eligible for up to 5,000. So, I mean, depending on what your business makes, that can be pretty significant. So we mentioned before the job training aspect of this, and for job training, there's $3.5 million, but some of this, or at least part of this, is ready to go. There's two parts that aren't quite ready to go. One of those is the job training and life skills. There will be a partner with the city on this. They have not released the name of that yet. There's going to be another one, and I don't recall them releasing the name of this partner either, but there's another partner who will be dealing directly with the licensed trades. So like electricians, plumbers, HVAC, things like that. But the one that's going to be rolling out pretty soon that already has money allocated, 1.3 million of the 3.5 million is allocated to the medical field, which is going to what's called the Talent Pipeline Management Program. And I've actually had a chance to see some of this, kind of how this program works behind the scenes. I've had some of it explained to me, and I think it's a really good program. I'm really excited that the city is putting this money into that. And again, I'm just going to continue to remind folks that if you're going to be living here in Lubbock and you're going to be here, or at least you're going to be here for a long time, or even if you're not going to be here, it's a good field to be in regardless. If you're not sure what you want to do with your life, you don't have a career picked out, consider the medical field, because there's going to be so much opportunity in this area for that. And if you're already going to be living here, if you're going to make a life here, why not? And what's going on with the Talent Pipeline Management Program in a nutshell is they're trying to make it to where folks don't just stay in one position. So you may not be qualified for some higher position right now, and that's fine. There's lots of different positions in the hospital profession, but you can start at one of those lower ones, and they will actually help you get trained and get the certifications and things you need to move up. So they'll actually help you through this Talent Pipeline Management Program. Yeah,
so this is based on an upskilling type concept, which is just really, if you have an interest in working in the healthcare industry, and as Adam mentioned, in the city of Lubbock, the healthcare industry is one of our most rock solid. Even during the COVID crisis, I think, is a special kind of economic recession because it creates a lot of healthcare challenges. But in general, when you look at the economics of Lubbock's healthcare ecosystem, Lubbock's healthcare system, even during times of economic downturns, that is a industry that really maintains its employment, even during those periods of time, because people still get sick. Now, some people delay the care that they're going to get because they're trying to wait and they're trying to save, or they're trying to, skimp on what care that they think that they can avoid. But overall, the economic impact of a recession on our healthcare system generally is a lot more muted than other industries. And so if you want to be working in a profession that has a lot of growth, in the city of Lubbock will continue to grow. This is an aging population that's going to require more healthcare services. We're a growing population, and more people means more healthcare services. And it's one that has resilience from economic recessions. It's a really good thing to think about. And you can start at any level. If you have no healthcare training whatsoever, You can begin that process, as say a nursing assistant or home health aide, and you can work your way up from there, whether it be pharmacy technician, radiological technician, assistants, continuing to move up, getting more certifications, degrees, accreditations, wherever you are in that process. The idea behind these kinds of programs is to meet you where you are and to see how they can increase your knowledge and your skills in the healthcare profession, because in general, we just need more people working in healthcare.
Yeah. Yeah. So something to think about for sure. And then we'll end off this whole thing with something that wasn't in the ARPA discussion, but this was in the later discussion in the regular city council meeting. And there's going to be 4 new playground updates going on, around the city. So there's going to be one in Aslan Park, and these basically what they're going to be doing is upgrading the playgrounds, and they have some really cool diagrams showing what those are going to look like. So it's going to be at Aslan Park. Of course, that's in North Lubbock in District 1. You have Ribble Park, which is in the Bayless-Atkins area. That's in District 2. And then you have Strong Park, which is over like 82nd and what is that?
The U?
Yeah, I think so. Strong Park. And then you have Wheelock Park, which is also in District 2. And so if you live near any of those parks, you'll be seeing this rolling out soon. They'll be upgrading those, and they look really nice. I actually go walk around Strong Park quite frequently, do a couple of miles there. And so, so I'm excited to hear about that. And speaking of Ribble Park in here, before we bring our guest on, who is about to be introduced, Ribble Park tomorrow at 6 p.m. The Bayless-Atkins Neighborhood Association is hosting a membership drive / meet and greet type event out at Ribble Park. Oh. And so they're going to have free hot dogs. There's going to be lots of community resources out there. You'll be able to register to vote if you haven't done that. There's just going to be so much stuff going on out there. So go out there, bring the family, bring the dog, and meet us out at Ribble Park tomorrow at 6 p.m. And so without further ado, we will bring on our special guest, Mr. Jason Rinaldo. He is currently running as a candidate for LISD District 3. Welcome, Jason.
Hey, how are you all?
Good. Thanks for joining us today. So really excited to have you on. And I guess we'll go ahead and start with why you decided to run for school board. And then after that, we'll go into kind of your background, your origin story. So why did you decide to run for LISD District 3?
I think it's because of the perception of a teaching crisis. You all probably may have heard the KTTZ story regarding local stressors on teachers post-COVID. And there's a lot of national talk about it too. And so that sort of set the stage. I'm a faculty member in the College of Business here at Texas Tech, and I am aware of the stresses that I was under going back and forth to online, having a class that was in person be pushed online because a whole bunch of students had a breakout of COVID. And I know what that was like for me. And I was just astounded at what I was seeing LISD teachers pull off for movement to online. And the quality of instruction that they provided online was just breathtaking. I was really impressed by that. And then as time drew on with COVID, watching sort of people turn on them. I mean, and I'll put it in those terms. Teachers were heroic at first, and the general public, I'm not just talking about Lubbock, although this I think happened in Lubbock. Nationwide, people were like, yay, teachers are doing amazing things. And then a month or 2 or 3 into it, yeah, I'm sort of fed up with this whole online thing. And I feel like teachers sometimes bore the brunt of that, even though they're struggling with increasing burdens and stresses of their own behind the scenes that we don't even get to know about. So that perception, followed by a whole bunch of people asking me to run, is why I'm here. So I'm not I ran for seventh grade student council. That was the last time I ran for anything.
Ooh, I like it.
So I'm not a political motivated person, but I do have a bunch of energy and a lot of ideas, and I play well with others. I get along with folks and can usually find ways to work with people who I may disagree with quite a lot. And I think those skills might be useful. That this is sort of where I start to confess my shortcomings. I don't pretend to know all of the challenges that the LISD administration faces. That would be kind of ridiculous for me to claim that, because I haven't been working in the midst of it all. But I'm fairly confident I can throw in my my thoughts, my efforts, my energy, and not make things worse. So
Yeah.
I've got some passion about it because I think that people are really struggling.
No, and I also say, you know, don't be too hard on yourself. You know, one of the things that I find I see a lot in Lubbock, and I'll just call it imposter syndrome, you know, is just sort of this feeling of being underqualified for these positions. In that, you know, that because of I haven't been on a school board before, I don't know how I'll do. You know, if you look at the historical backgrounds of folks that either run for the school board or on the school board, overwhelmingly it's businessmen, right? I mean, I'm not even using that, you know, very literally.
Right.
And when it comes to that, and it's somebody who generally they have a kid or multiple children in LISD, and they think this is
Right.
sort of the pathway. You know, it's historically been used as a stepping stone for greater political ambitions in the city as well. So you get kind of an all comers when it comes to the motivations for why somebody will run for school board.
Right.
And, you know, from that perspective, what I would say is, you know, Professor Rinaldo, I mean, you work in higher education, you have experience in teaching modalities and pedagogy, in understanding the transition to hybrid and online coursework and e-learning platforms. That's a lot, you know, like that's a very significant amount, like of understandings of education. And
I'm afraid we might go off into a tangent about that's relatively nerdy, but you're right. I'm benchmarking against what I think the situation calls for, and it calls for a lot of skill and talent. And if I instead benchmark against what's typical and whether I'm an improvement over that, I think I look like I'm in pretty good shape.
No, it's, you know, we won't go too far down that rabbit hole, but yes, like relative, I like, this is very mathy, relative versus absolute comparison there. But I agree with you. And it's just, you know, rising to the occasion, as you mentioned, being motivated because of an issue or a cause that you saw in the community. I mean, that to me is the pathway to political advocacy and policy advocacy for so many. You know, it wasn't something that you were born for, right? Were called to do as a young child.
No,
you know,
and if we ask the teachers that had me in their class throughout time, I'm not sure that they would be really enthusiastic.
Yeah. Well, you talked about not knowing all of the issues teachers are facing, and we certainly do not, but we have had a chance to listen to quite a few of the concerns teachers are having. And one of those that we know we've heard many times from many different teachers, many different schools, all across the district, is the issues around mental health. And so I guess it's a good segue into your background, because you have experience with that in your background. And so I guess let the folks know out there kind of your background, your origin story.
All right.
Yeah.
I have occasionally had mental health, like Adam has referred to there.
Yeah.
And I think he was probably being more specific. I sometimes am mentally healthy, sometimes less so, like all of us. I'm trained as a psychologist. If the details of that are, I'm trained as a clinical psychologist in a forensic setting. I've worked in a large number of prisons and jails. I've worked in outpatient clinics, though, and hospitals and regular psychological settings, too. So, yeah, I have quite a bit of information about mental health challenges what is stressful, what is less stressful, how to reduce stressors, et cetera, within an organizational context that might be relevant. I currently, and have for, oh my gosh, almost 20 years now, worked for the American Board of Family Medicine, doing large scale testing. I've been a psychometrician for a number of those years. I know quite a lot actually about testing and the challenges of it, when testing is useful and when it is not so useful. I can go on quite a lot about things that I see being used in testing currently that I think can at least be improved upon. I'm holding back a little bit there. There are a lot of things I think that could be improved upon with testing as it is done in the school system. Some of those LISD board and administrators may have some influence over, and some are, of course, controlled at the state level.
Right. And there's both, right? So there's both, what you can do in policy and what you can do on the soapbox, right? And so
right.
Even if this is just soapboxing, I'd be curious to, what's something that you've seen within the policy context in that kind of assessment that you
Sure.
think you should probably revisit or think about again?
So an experience that I've had for quite a long time, I get calls, I've been routed calls from physicians who have failed to pass their board exam, and they're very frustrated and upset, and so it's been hundreds of people, and I track exactly what's gone on, what's worked for them to study and what hasn't worked, et cetera, what their outcomes are, background and all. And one dramatically clear thing from the data is that asking a person questions doesn't increase their knowledge. It doesn't change their knowledge at all. Testing does not improve knowledge. Otherwise, school would look like just a series of tests. Sadly, that's the direction we're moving. So anytime you're spending a day or two or three or a week testing, that's not a period where learning is happening. And so there's actually, at this point, it looks like a trade-off. There's a lot of days spent testing, or where another class or an associated group is testing, and so you're not getting education at that time. Being asked questions does not improve your knowledge. And that's a little bit frustrating to see how much we're putting into testing. It's, on the other hand, I'll say, asking somebody if they know something is a really useful thing to see whether they know something. So it's not as if the asking is the problem here. However, if you imply that, and if you don't get it right, your teacher is going to get canned, that's not the right environment for any student to perform well, assuming they care about their teacher, which most students do. So there are issues in that, the level of stress and pressure that gets passed down, it trickles down from folks concerned about budget, all the way down to students, where I have interacted with students who are in tears because they're afraid about how their performance is going to affect their teachers.
Oh.
I'm going to take a moment to catch my emotions because it's really upsetting. It's wrong. So that's an example of how testing can be awful. It can be punitive, and it can be highly detrimental to future learning. Because then when the student is in the class for the week following such a test, even if they don't know their outcomes, they're then approaching the learning entirely differently under a lot of pressure. And if you have a lion in the room while students are trying to learn, they're not going to learn well. They're going to be too focused on the danger. The cortisol is ramped up. They're just worried about the well-being of the people they care about around them, like their teachers. So anyway, as you can see, this sort of spirals into an administrative disaster that I think is avoidable.
Right. And not only that, but, because of the wealth of knowledge that you have in your background, talking about stress levels in schools, right? How this turns into what we think of as cortisol in the brain causing stress. My first exposure to this in the context of learning was in actually how stress levels have an impact on mathematical reasoning. That is one area of the brain in the prefrontal cortex that struggles really hard in stressful environments. And it makes you think about, well, what exactly is the value of a math exam if some amounts of higher level executive functioning because of the level of stress that they receive in an exam setting is effectively inhibiting their ability to actually do math in a more calm or normalized setting, right? And so when I think about just the various ways that this plays a role, it goes beyond the classroom even. I think about the knowledge you could bring in thinking about from a choice architecture or a behavioral economic standpoint about the choices that kids are offered in the schools, whether it comes to, how are cafeteria meals presented to them, and how do they make the choices about that, and these kind of other components. Because every day there's so many choices that both the school makes and the child makes in the educational environment. Mm-hmm. And how do you create systems that promote learning? I think when I think about your background and having that type of knowledge in institutional settings, it seems like there's a lot of carryover there. I don't know. Is that, how do you feel about that?
I feel about it. That's an empirical question, Dr. Bergfeld. We need to test that. So if I get elected, we'll find out.
You have to get elected first. Yeah. It's an interesting scientific hypothesis. Yeah, exactly.
It's one that I think is worth testing. Because like I said, I'm highly confident that I can keep things from getting worse. I don't know how much I feel like is an honest promise to make things better, because I think I see the tip of the iceberg of problems at this point. I suspect things are much deeper than what we've heard from dozens of teachers so far who've given feedback. So I'm not going to make any ridiculous promises about what can be accomplished. I can absolutely promise that I can put forth my full faculties and effort toward doing so, though, to making things better.
Yeah. So when you think about some of that feedback you've gotten, what is something or some things that have stuck out to you? And do you have any thoughts on those things formulated yet? So just anything you may have heard from teachers that you've been thinking about in your thoughts. Yeah.
So there's a ton that I've learned from teachers. I didn't go to school in this district. I went to school elsewhere in Texas, but the teachers in this district are under pressure from many different sources. These are, for the most part, highly resilient people who can hold up to 2 or 3 major stressors for weeks on end. But at this point, we're talking about years on end, with pressures just being increasingly piled on like straws on a camel's back, such that there are a good number of teachers, the national percentage is roughly 50% by polling estimates of teachers who are talking about or thinking about considering quitting. I don't think Lubbock is especially different from that, given what I've tried to learn so far. So, for example, Bill 4545 of the Texas legislature says that for every failed STAR test, a student has to receive 30 hours of specialized tutoring from teachers. Well, during COVID, learning was difficult. We have a much higher fail rate of the STAR tests than is typical. So if you imagine 25% of students now failing at least one section, and that amplified our commitment now required by law of teachers, but you've got no burst capacity. It's not like you have a lot of teachers laying around. And in fact, the opposite has been happening. We've been steadily losing teachers at an accelerating rate. We're shooting ourselves in the foot. It becomes what I've referred to as, it's a bit of a death spiral. That's a morbid way to put it. And I don't think that I'm being overly dramatic, though. As teachers get more things as fewer teachers get more things put on them, we get fewer teachers even faster. And that's really the summary of all of the things. House Bill 4545 was just one of many other initiatives that have been taken on and added to teachers' plates increasingly. So one that's really obvious that almost everybody has heard about: teachers are very often not able to teach. They're busy substituting in the classes of missing teachers. When you're substituting in a science class and you're a social studies teacher, you're probably not able to get them to the next stage of knowledge required for that science curriculum, because that's not the one that you're an expert in. It's not really reasonable to expect that. But it has to be done because we need a warm body in the room supervising those students. And so that's another accelerator of the deterioration. That means more failed STAR tests, which means that whenever a teacher does get back into that science classroom, they have an exploded workload way beyond what we would have normally seen in 2018. So that's just a glimpse. To me, that's the tip of the iceberg that I've started to wrap my head around, to feel like, oh, wow, this is an actual crisis that we're in the middle of. And I don't feel like the community is broadly aware of that. The teachers sure as hell are.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's the perfect word for it, is a crisis. And I think it's important for people to understand that. And we're just talking about Lubbock here, guys. We're not talking about nationally, though it is happening nationally and it's a national crisis. We have it here. It's here in Lubbock. And I wish I could say something different, but that crisis is alive and well here. And I just grow increasingly concerned for our teachers. It's really tough to listen to them and to know that they care so much about what they do. But everybody has a breaking point. I mean, self-preservation is going to kick in at some point. There's only so much they can take. And I think it's really unfortunate that that's the situation for these folks who shape a lot of our lives.
Yeah.
I wouldn't even be doing any of the things that I am doing today if it wasn't for a couple of teachers who basically helped me to graduate, because I wasn't going to. And they did that on their own. Lord knows I wasn't going to ask them to do it at that point in my life. And everybody else had given up.
Yeah.
I just think it's really unfortunate. And I think that on all levels, especially the state, who these folks are so far away from this issue that they create, I think that we just have to have teachers at the forefront of the conversation at all times. We should treat them like we do first responders.
Right. Exactly right. That's exactly how I think of it. There's been for my entire lifetime a nonstop political dialogue about how the family is the core of the community and we must support families and fix families somehow, as if there's a magic family fixing wand out there. Yeah. I would offer the notion that teachers are a building block of the community, and we can help them. You can't really intervene with somebody's marriage and family quite that easily as a legislator, but you can for damn sure help a teacher. And they build the community. They build the relationships. They make a classroom where students can bond with each other and with the teacher and with the broader community that they're in. That's how community is built. Teachers are fundamental to that.
Yeah. Well, we do have a question from Kim on Facebook. She says, what are your thoughts on school closures in Lubbock and the impact of those closures on communities?
Oh, nice segue.
Yeah. That one is actually a sort of disturbing question for me, because part of the death spiral concern that I've got is if we've got a loss, if we have attrition of students going out to the suburbs, what has been called white flight for quite a while. Right. If we're losing students at around 1,000 students per year in LISD, then we have lower enrollment and the budget falls. So 1,000 is roughly 4% drop in enrollment. 4% cut to your budget on an annual basis for a few years is kind of a crisis. It leaves you with very few resources. So it means that you're going to wind up closing schools and slashing resources to try to stay afloat. It's what you might feel compelled to do. Because the process of trying to recruit students and families back into LISD district areas and getting those families grown up and reproducing more little kids to go to school, that's obviously a really long-term thing. But the budget problem is like a now thing. And so I don't see especially easy fixes for this. This is one of those areas where it's clearly going to take a deep dive to really wrap my head around what might be done productively. But so far, I haven't seen an all hands on deck type approach to preventing school closures. And so here's thinking about this. I'm sitting here in a business college and thinking about this from an economic standpoint. If you're a person who's shopped for a house before, everybody knows that the house value is tied to the value of the schools around you. If those schools go away, your housing value goes away too. And soon you can be underwater because of a school closing you didn't see coming. You can be underwater because your housing value dropped below what you've got left on your mortgage. Like, these are really substantial, across generation impact financial decisions that get made. I've been a little bit concerned about how some of those closures have been sprung upon the community. In watching LISD board meetings, I was sort of stricken by the fact that, oh, it's a closed door meeting when we're talking about property and leasing and property transactions. I don't know what, there might be a really good reason for that. I don't know why. But to me, there's a transparency issue that affects the community and things like property values and really lifestyle and people's well-being really heavily. And those don't seem to me to be things that I'd want to have behind closed doors and then send out a flyer that we're closing Dupree.
Right. And I love how you brought these issues together of the intersection of economics and education in Lubbock. And this is something that we've seen over and over again in advocacy work, especially in East Lubbock and as you mentioned, the Heart of Lubbock neighborhood, Dupree. And this is why school board elections are bigger than just about being about students, are bigger than being just about education or the teachers. They're about the community. They're about preservation of the value of the community, of preservation of the property tax base, which ultimately is what feeds back into creating healthy environments and preventing adverse childhood events from essentially the social aspects of a child's life and the quality of the environment that they live in. And so you can't, regardless, I think in Lubbock, there's always a challenge when trying to convince voters, well, I don't have a kid, so why should I vote in a school board election? Or I don't have a child, why should I vote for an LISD bond issuance? And there's always this conversation that has to be had of saying, look, education and its role in our community is bigger than just simply the physical property and the kids going there on a daily basis. It has an impact on the livelihood of our community at a broader scale, right? And if you live in a community that has a school and then loses a school, there's an impact on property value, right? And we've seen that. Maybe that's not true in every city in the United States, but it's generally true. And in Lubbock, if you can just simply drive by the addresses of the closed elementary schools and see the economic reality of that, there's not really a whole lot of measures necessary to see that level of degradation over time.
Yeah. And, one thing I'll add, and we have another question, this actually goes perfectly in with. So when folks ask me about this issue, and I know we've talked about this at some of those meetings with teachers and things, I say it all the time. It's going to have to be a collaboration between the city and LISD, because it's city policy that started the population declines. And
right.
So
That's right.
LISD cannot necessarily do anything on its own to fix that. And I would say that they have much less power to fix that part of it than the city does. And so let's hope that when we have a new council and a new mayor, that they continue to put resources in some of these areas that have lost population, because that has to come first. You have to have stuff there. You have to have houses there for people to want to have their families there. I was on the Chad Hasty show the other morning and I got the question about this. And you can't blame people for going to Southwest Lubbock when that's where all of the amenities are being built. If you're having a family, anybody out there wants the best that they can afford for their family. And so if you can afford it and you can go move out to Southwest Lubbock, why would you not? So you can't blame the people, because it's not the people who set that policy in motion. This was city policy. So let's say that is happening, right? Let's say the city, we got a new council, we got a new mayor. The city is saying, okay, we're going to have policies to support people moving back to these communities. Well, looking with the, I guess with the knowledge you have so far, this is a question from Kenneth on Facebook. Where would you look to make budget cuts to keep schools open?
That's a great question. And this is a really stupid political move I'm about to do, because I'm not really good at this. I have no idea. I haven't read the whole budget. So it would take some work. I'd need probably a solid week looking at the budget and drilling down into what every expenditure is before I had any kind of meaningful, intelligent response. I'd like to be able to give one, but I would have to be immersed in the budget to be able to give an intelligent answer to that. Places where I would look in general would be things related to personnel management. In most organizations, there's a lot of energy being put into managing your people. It can suck up a lot of a budget. And so that's sort of a beginning place. I'd want to look at what processes are there in place for hiring. And for example, right now, I know that Lubbock is trying to backfill a lot of missing teacher spots, and recruiting people to Lubbock, new teachers to Lubbock, or getting tech grads from the education department to stay in Lubbock is a hell of an undertaking. I would want to look at what's being done there to be able to create longer term solutions, getting the staffing up to 100% so that we can function more efficiently. So we're not perhaps paying for stopgap measures. So when you have to do emergency work to cover and patch holes, that's generally highly inefficient compared. So if you might have 8 or 9 subs rotating in and out of a few classrooms, having a teacher there for $35,000 or whatever the salary might be appropriate is almost always going to be more efficient than trying to patchwork things together. So just getting things running on a normal basis is where I'd start looking.
That makes sense. And I think it's a wise approach from the feedback that we typically get from folks in the community interfacing with LISD when it comes to personal management expenses and overall kind of admin, which I think is a broader critique of education, that central office, sort of the main administrative side of LISD, seems to continue to expand in scope and size, and the number of positions within that that aren't necessarily directly operational when it comes to working with students or educators or things like that. I also would like to think that maybe there's some benefits to automation on some of the personal management side as well, that maybe historically we haven't explored as a community, or haven't thought about sort of better software technology or relationship management software that could be used now. So I think that's a really great place to start, when thinking about where could there be inefficiencies in the way that things are currently structured.
Yeah. And I've been pushing this idea of, automating certain things or modernizing the system, and just knowing tech to a pretty good degree. I know that if you spend the money for security, especially in a school situation like this, you would need to. But if you spend the money for security and you create an institutional app, a lot of that information that they're probably having to fill out over and over could just be in the system. And so you could have things like that, but there are also the what are called the ESSER funds, ESSR funds, which came out of the American Rescue Plan Act. But the ESSER funds are those monies that were sent to school districts out of that. And so there's very there's a bunch of different categories similar to the city that they can use those in. One of those is health, right? So you can make an argument, a very valid argument, that creating a more efficient system that reduces stress on teachers is directly impacting their mental health at work. And so I think that using those funds in a way, because we're not going to get them again, obviously, there's a lot of it there. And I think finding creative ways to use those things that can set us up for getting to a different kind of future. So just my 2 cents. Sorry.
My inclination, this is something I brought up earlier. It may be completely fantasy, but if I had the absolute power, I would set aside a mental health hour every week for every teacher with counselors in the building. As it is, there's a lot of organizations will have what's called an EAP program. Folks listening may be familiar with that, the Employee Assistance Program, where you're allotted a handful of hours per year to go see a counselor. That's generally not a bad idea, but when you're talking about teachers who are putting in 50 hours a week, it's not like their few hours to manage their family and personal lives can easily be spent driving across town, arranging a therapy hour, et cetera, coordinating all that. They're juggling too many things. So in my little fantasy world, you'd have counselors in the actual school for the adults, not just for the kids. Because right now we've got counselors for kids. The adults need them too. I'm a believer, obviously, in mental health services as a psychologist.
Oh, and that's my kind of final question. I think that's a great lead into that. From your background and experience, what are ways or things that you think an institution like LISD can do to decrease stress, right? And I like the example that you gave and the nuance there, because in healthcare, this has always been a big critique of wellness programs, that if you just add more and more things on top of somebody's already daily routine, right, that it just becomes the issue at hand is not necessarily wanting a desire to say go to a yoga class so much so as it is how does that fit and how is it even possible scheduling wise to get that. And so what if you either elaborate more on that, or what's something that you could think about to de-stress, I'll say, something that could be done to try to decrease the anxiety within the institution of LISD or in the workplace?
I actually think, so I'll just borrow from the teachers I've talked to. This is not any kind of psychological wizardry, but their count of paraprofessionals who usually are there to back them up is way, way, way low. And so they've got no assistants in the classroom. So it's basic human living things that are just horribly neglected. Like if a teacher needs to use the restroom, they've got nobody to watch the class. So they're doing the potty dance all day like the toddlers would be doing. That's not really civilized. That's not an appropriate way to treat fundamental building blocks of the community. So it'd start with just getting staffing to where it needs to be, so that there's enough backup and support to give people a break. And it apparently is not there at all right now. That's no form of mysterious answer.
Yeah. And I think they're going to continue to, if something is not done to turn this stuff around, which is going to require not only school districts, but the state. And if this is not actively turned around, and we'll see what comes of the governor's task force, trying to study these issues out of nowhere, but I digress. If this doesn't get turned around, it's going to be very, very bad. And you're going to continue to see more and more people not wanting to get into the profession of teaching.
Absolutely.
I mean, at this point, I have so much respect for folks who go into that knowing that it's been this way for so many years, and they just have such a heart to do that they go in there smiling every day. Like I've never seen a teacher that, is just crabby all day. I mean, I've literally they go in there and they're under all of this stress. They're dealing with so much, and they're doing it smiling every day. But that we need to do better for them, for sure. And then we also need to make sure that things continue to get better, and so that the profession over time is looked at as something that somebody would actually want to spend their life doing.
Right.
And that takes a lot. It takes efficiency of the system. It takes culture, a work culture, which those two things can be done locally. But it also takes these state lawmakers, again, hopefully something good comes out of this task force, because they need more information clearly before they start making these decisions. And so I would just say, everybody out there, continue to pray for our teachers, continue to try to advocate on their behalf as much as you can.
Continue to volunteer, sign up and volunteer to go and help out. It's a permissible thing.
Yes, and that's I'm glad you brought that up. Speaking of those ESSER funds, LISD is using some of this money to increase the pay that they pay folks that come and substitute teach, and they need a lot of folks. And so if you're somebody that would be interested in doing something like that, or you want to help out teachers, go and talk to LISD and try to become a sub. That's you'll get paid for it. And so it's pretty decent. With the increases, it's pretty decent per day. And so just something to think about if you would like to take some of this burden off and you're able to do that. So, thanks, Jason. And
how do people
reach out?
How do they reach out? How do they get in touch with you? How do they get involved?
Well, I'll give an email address, and I deal with a couple hundred emails a day already. And so I'm going to hate myself for this. I'll reply to you at Rinaldo Lubbock at Gmail, RINALDO Lubbock at Gmail is the email address for my campaign. There's also a lot of other emails out there floating around. You can find me at Texas Tech and I'll reply there. I'm almost always attached to some device that will do email.
And you do have a Facebook page, correct?
You have a Facebook page?
I've got a Facebook page. It's Dr. Jason Rinaldo for District 3, I believe. Mm-hmm. And so that's a way. I'm not especially hard to get a hold of. So I'd love to hear feedback. If there are people with ideas or complaints or concerns, or if I'm wrong about something, you know how I'm going to get it right? Somebody's going to tell me and teach me.
Yeah.
So thanks a lot.
Yeah, well, that's a good attitude to have. And so definitely everybody reach out to not only Jason, but all of the school board candidates with your concerns at any time. I would encourage this. And I would also encourage everybody to make sure they come out and vote. This is going to be a very important school board election this time around. So we will be signing off once again with our weekly reminder to join your neighborhood association. And we will see you all back here next Wednesday.